We go to the Titanic, it will squeeze in about 3/4 of an inch. It just deforms. And acrylic's great because it squeezes in, and before it cracks or fails, it starts to crackle. And so you get a huge warning if it's going to fail.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Some say the Titan sub was actually a successful, innovative submersible in the sense that a vessel made partially of carbon fiber did actually make it down to the Titanic a few times. What do you think about that? It's an interesting point because in the narrow schema of that perspective, it's true. The vehicle did go down to those crushing depths, wasn't crushed, and it brought its passengers back up safe and sound. It's a misleading narrative. It's misleading because it's only a successful innovation until it isn't. I think, as we saw in the Rust incident, it's a mistake to see the incident itself in a vacuum and not connected to a fabric of context and circumstances where it becomes abundantly clear that your accident isn't an accident. It can't be an accident if it's an accident waiting to happen. In other words, if you were paying attention and awake and you saw a crisis evolving, escalating into an emergency, well then you would have known what was happening. You would have seen what was happening. You would have seen what was coming, almost like a wave. So what's already quite clear in the Titan submersible disaster isn't just that they saw and heard signs while they were down below and were trying to manage that emergency. They were trying to manage an emergency long before that, right? They were doing that already when they were on the surface. They simply didn't recognize it as an emergency. Well, why? Because it's a successful innovation until it isn't. Many human beings actually do think this way, by the way. They can't be convinced something is a different way or that reality isn't as cookie cutter as they imagine until it's too late. Climate change is like that. The pandemic was like that as well. By the time you realized you were wrong and how wrong you were, you're dead. Health issues work like that often as well. We know from James Cameron that the approach on Titan was to listen to sensors warning them that the hull was starting to crack. Cameron told ABC News,
give them a warning when it was starting to crack. And I think if that's your idea of safety, then you're doing it wrong.
And this is the crux. That was their idea of safety. That's like eating ice cream until you get a severe chest pain and you say, okay, I can tell I'm about to have a heart attack. But you've been ignoring doctor's orders all along. Okay, I'll stop. But not all heart attacks come with advance warning, and even those that do don't necessarily ask for an RSVP. So can you see, this submarine wasn't a successful, innovative submersible, and it was never going to be. Instead, it was always fatally flawed. And I want to take this narrative much further and get a lot more practical than we have thus far. But before we get to the rest of this episode, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, please do. I'll give you a moment to do that. By the way, I'll be doing a fascinating follow-up to the analysis here, where we're going to look at the experience of Travel Weekly editor Arnie Wiseman, who went on Mission 3 in May, also the same time as that YouTuber, Jay Kohler, and also had an interesting experience there. And that's going to flesh out even further what we already know about this tragic story. If you're enjoying this episode, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So what do you think? Is the heart quite a good analogy for a vessel that is so worn down it eventually fails? You keep pushing it. Is it a matter that you're listening to the symptoms or that you start to ignore them? You start to just accept that they're there and see how far you can push it. And then when it does fail, it fails catastrophically. It's like getting a heart attack on the summit of Everest or while running the Marathon des Sables through the Sahara Desert or the Badwater through the Sierra Nevada. Another example of this would be you ride on bald tires and you say, well, when the tires start wobbling a certain amount, when the vehicle starts to shudder, oh, okay, then it's time. That's when I must be careful. Couldn't you have known? Shouldn't you have known? If multiple doctors or mechanics warned you and you continued regardless, did you not know? What makes this tragedy so tragic is the leadership figure, and what is more symbolic of a leader than a CEO or a ship's captain, or even worse, the ship's captain who is the CEO? He's the one who ought to have known. He's also the engineer. He's also the designer and maker of the craft. And if you say he ought to have known, well, didn't he know? Didn't he know? And he was the one inviting folks, flocks of folks, dozens of paying guests into his death trap. If his attitude was wrong, if it was...
So you just figured you'd come out here with no training of any kind and see how it went?
Maybe I was sick of doctors telling me what I couldn't do.
And bear in mind, that is part of Stockton Rush's backstory, where doctors said that his vision was 2025 or something like that, and that was why he couldn't continue to pursue his real dream, which was to go into outer space, to be a military pilot. His dream had been scuppered before by what somebody else said, and he didn't want that to happen again. He was making it his life's mission for that not to happen again, to prove that he knew better, that he could do better, that he was better. And ultimately, this idea of having defective vision somehow seems to be even more broadly symbolic. Not being able to see in the real world and then not being able to see into your own situation. If his attitude was wrong, if it was, we'll just see how it goes, his engineering approach was also wrong. Look, I'm not an engineer, although my brother is. I'm not sure if that counts or anything. But I imagine even the most reliable submersibles do have different materials with different molecular structures and with different molecular coefficients. You can probably get away with using plexiglass in a submersible as long as your portholes are very small. As soon as you have large fractions of a craft being this material with that molecular coefficient, while its neighbor is another large puzzle piece of the submersible with another different molecular coefficient, and then another one, you can see how immense pressure is going to cause gyrations that are going to be overwhelming and eventually lead to failures. It's kind of inevitable, but it's also not rocket science. When you read the literature, when you listen to folks like Travel Weekly editor Arnie Wiseman, as I say, I'm going to be doing a follow-up to this analysis dealing with his awesome 3-part series. He went on mission 3. He was there when the YouTuber Jay Kohler or D Almighty, they were on the same mission. You really get a real-time practical sense of what we're talking about here. That by 2023, Ocean Gate's tires were bald. The operation was so worn out that they were chartering a cheaper vessel and taking chances. They were dragging their spaceship behind it like a cowboy roping a steer and then crossing the Rockies. It's not fair to say that the Titan was a success. The craft was designed to do multiple visits at extreme depths safely, not 1 or 2. It wasn't like go down once, come back up, job done, well, I proved my case. And despite the quote-unquote mission specialist puffery, which may have actually been a tax scheme, it may have been about paying tourists, basically signing up as a member of staff, and the company getting a tax benefit. Well, Titan was really a commercial submersible. There aren't more than a handful of those in the world, and the submersibles that do exist aren't like first-class seats on an airline. By merely having such a big window of a particular material, which has different elasticity to the titanium surrounding it, and of course also very different to the carbon fiber and the resin. Remember, this is what Stockton Rush said about the plexiglass and how it deformed.
To the Titanic, it will squeeze in about 3/4 of an inch. It just deforms. And acrylic's great because it squeezes in, and before it cracks or fails, it starts to crackle. And so you get a huge warning if it's going to fail.
So that alone, having this big part, this big component of the submersible that is so elastic, that alone could have doomed the Titan. What is strange is the CEO's inability to imagine failure when his own pilot, P.H. Nargolay, seemed resigned to it. Nargolay told Travel Weekly editor Arnie Wiseman that he wasn't worried about what would happen if the structure was damaged or failed at the bottom of the sea, said, under that pressure, you'll be dead before you know there's a problem. And he apparently said that with a smile. It's clear that OceanGate shouldn't have been doing what it was doing. That's what James Cameron told Reuters. Cameron also declined an invitation from the CEO from Stockton Rush to go diving with them this season. Can you believe it? Cameron described OceanGate's use of carbon fiber hull as fundamentally flawed, that he just shouldn't have been using it in the first place, and said he'd warned another company several years ago against using that same design principle. And he says he's sorry for not speaking up more this time round. And he says, now because of that, there's one wreck lying next to the other wreck for the same damn reason. Now think about this. If Cameron regrets not speaking up, what about the OceanGate staff that could have and should have? Besides Lockridge in 2018, weren't there any other engineers on board who knew better? Did they know better and yet allow the endless PR puffery to go out while the CEO himself was doing road shows, towing along the Titan across the America's highway system? According to NPR, Cameron stressed that deep submergence diving is a mature art. Let's listen to that.
Deep submergence diving is a mature art. From the early 60s, where there were, a few accidents, nobody was killed in the deep submergence, until now, is more time than between Kitty Hawk and the flight of the first 747. So if we haven't improved over that period of time, we have improved drastically over that period of time.
I think Titan was exceptional for all the wrong reasons, because its maker saw himself as above and beyond the rules as well. Cleverer than everyone else, entitled to special treatment because he's very special. In a word, hubris. And hubris is what gets you and everyone else with you into Davy Jones's locker.
And the certification protocols that all other deep submergence vehicles, except this one, that carry passengers, especially paying passengers, all over the world in tropical waters, deep coral reefs, other wreck sites, and so on. Safety record is the gold standard, absolutely. Not only no fatalities, but no major incidents requiring all of these assets to converge to a site.
So you hear him there describing modern submersible technology as a mature art. He describes the innovation narrative for submersibles as being longer and better and safer than the advances made between Kitty Hawk and the DC-3 and the first 747. And it's possibly because the CEO was an aviation guy that he took this sort of maverick approach into the depths with him. The right approach in extreme situations like this is conservative maturity, proven design, not breaking the rules. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.